Hello and very warm welcome to the Arise interview, 60 minutes of big questions about the big stories from the news and beyond with fresh insight and critical analysis. I am Christian Ogodo. Thanks for joining us, and we're live in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Coming up in the next hour, a highly charged political atmosphere as millions of Burundians gear up to vote in a divisive general election in the coming days. Political campaigns have ended, but they have been marred by violence and hate speech, with both sides blaming one another. And the United Nations, the African Union, have also been appealing for a stable and peaceful environment for Burundi elections that will turn the page on the tumultuous tenure of Pierre Nkurunziza, in power since 2005. More so, there are growing concerns about the government's response to the COVID-19 fight. We'll have top-notch analysis. An incumbent President Pierre Nkurunziza has promised to step aside after 15 years in power. His election in 2015 was highly controversial. It triggered a failed military coup d'etat and a crackdown on the opposition. Many journalists and human rights defenders went into exile. Now, the ruling party, CNDD-FDD, has elected an Army General, Evariste Ndayishimiye, as its candidate. And the main opposition, the National Freedom Council, has Agathon Rwasa, who is a former leader of Hutu rebel group, the National Liberation Forces. It is a dominating contest between both, even as political campaigns came to an end. Correspondents say the ruling party is determined to safeguard its hold on power, even at the cost of a collapsing social order. Some observers have stated that opposition supporters have been harassed with sporadic violence, with some claiming that it has led to some killings.
I am from the north and the south. I am the child of Burundi. Each one of you has delegated me, and I am at your disposal. I come to be the servant of all, my dear Burundians.
As it is mandatory, all political parties are stopping their campaigns. Now we are waiting to deliver on May the 20th, and we are confident of a victory. The Burundi we want to build is the Burundi that no longer has the bad habits that have plagued our country. We all have a part to contribute.
The first thing he will do for us is eradicate injustice in the country, poverty, eradicate all other obstacles that prevent the freedom of every Burundian to be in peace and tranquility in their country of milk and honey.
Burundians are being killed every day. We are tired. We want change in this country. That's why we want that Honorable Agathon Rwasa to win these elections 100%.
Okay, for more on this, I've now been joined via WebEx from East Africa, the capital of Kenya, Nairobi, by Arise News correspondent Mark Bichachi. And here in the studios by the African Affairs analyst and journalist, well-traveled, Lindsay Barrett. Gentlemen, very warm welcome, but maybe I should just start from East Africa there, where Bichachi, has a foothold in East African politics and the rest. Bichachi, what do you think will be the outcome of this election? Is there an election that you can put a finger on for a candidate that will win outrightly?
Well, it depends on what results you're looking for. If you're looking for the real results of the election, that will be tricky to tell. There are no observers that have been allowed into the country. There is no way of telling whether the election will be free and fair. But based on the signs that we are seeing, we expect that Nkurunziza's candidate will win the election just based on the amount of intimidation and the kind of electoral practices they've had before. The second thing that will happen is obviously Rwasa will oppose that win, and most likely we may see further violence coming out of Burundi. That's the most likely scenario if the signs are anything to go by.
Wouldn't be surprising, would it? I mean, when you look at Nkurunziza, he's coming to power and holding on to power for 15 solid years, particularly the election in 2015, which constitutionally he wasn't qualified to contest, but the constitution was amended, you know, surreptitiously, and he had that contest. Yeah. So you wouldn't be surprised with the outcome, would you?
Not at all, not at all. Let us remember that even if you look at the ruling, and when they said that observers will be required to quarantine, that was an obvious sign that they were not planning to hold free and fair elections. So I highly doubt that Nkurunziza has somehow changed his tone, and his candidate, Evaristo, is clearly cut from the same cloth as Nkurunziza's, and that's why they support each other.
All right, let me turn to Lindsay. I'll be back shortly with you, our colleague in Nairobi, Bichachi. But Lindsay, you aren't surprised. It's like taking us back to the 19th century Africa in today's modernity.
Very unfortunate. The public mood was clearly signaled in 2018. When a referendum was done, in which the people clearly said they were tired of Nkurunziza and his ilk. After that result, a win for his candidate now will be a very doubtful result. It's going to be a very sad event if this election is manipulated, and clearly, given recent days' events, clearly manipulation rather than proper contestation is what is on the ground. This is unfortunate because Burundi has had a very violent experience in democracy. Its democracy has been violent. And it's interesting that the ruling party, it's an alliance of two groups who claim to be defenders of democracy, but their method of defense of democracy over the years has been intimidation.
But what's precludes...
This is unfortunate.
Yeah, very unfortunate indeed, Lindsay. But what is it that precludes the African Union for putting its feet down? To say, look, if you're not allowing observers in, then we discredit this election. Would it be too much for the African Union to say?
I think eventually they will have to discredit whatever comes out, because the issue of peer, you know, the what is it called? Peer...
Nkurunziza.
No, there is some formality that the African Union has insisted on. It's called peer judgment or something.
Yeah.
It will not work here. Imagine the ruling party said they would allow observers from the East African community, and then said these people would be in isolation on the voting day because of COVID-19. You know,
and so they are not mindful of the COVID-19, and they are going on with the election just in 2 days' time.
In any case, part of the disgruntlement of the populace with the government, they made it very plain that they don't believe that the government is doing anything at all about COVID-19. About the coronavirus.
Okay, let's just cross back again to Nairobi, the Kenyan capital, where Mark Bichachi is there for us. If you tell us, do you think the opposition have faith in this election? They are contesting along with a total number of 7 presidential candidates are in this race. Do you think they will accept the result if they lose the election? There are ominous signs on the way that they probably will not accept it.
I agree with you. It is unlikely that they will agree with the results. Already, Rwasa is on record as saying that he has a serious issue with the voters' roll, the voters' register. And already there are signs that the opposition members have been harassed, even claims that some have died. As such, the expectation from my end, honestly, is I do not think Rwasa or his team believe that the election is going to be fair, and therefore I don't think they believe they're going to win. There've been talk of, in case of a runoff, that the other candidates will line up to support Rwasa, but that is highly doubtful, just based on the kind of games that already Nkurunziza is playing. And let's not forget about the immense power that Nkurunziza still has until August. He is still president, and that is going to play a key role.
Indeed, and probably that's why Nkurunziza, the incumbent president, and this party have selected an army general in the person of Evariste Ndayameshiye. Do you think this is very key to the victory of CNDD-FDD?
Well, it is very key in the sense that this particular fellow Evaristo is quite has been active in Burundian politics for quite a long time. He has a reputation, and of course, you know, the party, the ruling party, has had support before. So it is key in the sense that they're fielding a candidate that is popular enough to justify a win by the ruling party. But remember, for a very long time, the ruling party has not been on the right side of Burundians. Further, and just to underscore this, let us remember that Nkurunziza has the power to declare an emergency should the election be disputed. And those are the key questions that we must ask ourselves. What will he do with that power? And what will a former army general do when he's faced with the question of losing an election, if it comes to that?
Questions are quite enormous, pouring in, because some people are saying too that if Rwasa kind of fails to accept the results, just in 30 seconds, if you can attempt this, that there could still be chaos and the rest, because the opposition want to pour onto the streets.
Definitely, for sure, the opposition will go out on the street. From what we're hearing on the ground, that is already the feeling in the ground. There's a lot of tension in Burundi. So yes, the opposition will go out in large numbers if Rwasa refuses to accept losing an election.
All right, thanks so very much, Mark Bichachi. We'll be back, but we want to take some messages. And when we return, we'll look at why army generals are so, key in African politics. You're still watching the Arise interview. Please stay with us. You're welcome back to the Arise interview with me, Christian Ogodowa, live in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. 5 years of a political crisis in Burundi have battered the nation's economy, and there is little hope of a turnaround in the coming election, as feeble signs of recovery have been dashed by the coronavirus. Since the last election in 2015, poverty and unemployment have worsened, the Burundian franc has plummeted, imported products and foreign currency are scarce, and the country was placed under sanctions in the wake of the post-electoral violence. Incumbent President Pierre Nkurunziza says he will relinquish office after the 2020 polls. Around 1,200 people died in unrest in the last polls in 2015, while another 400,000 to 500,000 are said to have fled into exile. Several of these exiles have little hope that the new polls will bring real change.
I hope these elections that are happening now will be in peace. We will finally be able to start again and be like all the emerging countries in Africa. I want to go back to Burundi. If I could, I would go now, but I don't feel safe here already because I still get threats But yes, I would like to go back home.
I took part in the protest against Nkurunziza's illegal third term. At some point, when we realized that what we wanted was impossible, we saw the police shooting at us with real bullets. So we tried to leave Burundi to find a safe place. That was a tough time for demonstrators. What's happening in Burundi is activists for political parties are fighting each other. There's always the same ideology of people who fight for nothing, for political failure. But I hope one day Burundi will have a leader that cares about Burundians, who wants peace. My dream is to return to Burundi. It is my homeland. But it is not easy to return to my country because there are always political problems.
Okay, we still have in Nairobi, the Kenyan capital, Mark Bichachi, a Rise News correspondent in East Africa there, and here in the studio I still have the international journalist and African writer Lindsay Barrett. Before I come to you, Mark, let me just quickly get the views of Lindsay. Why are military generals the choice, the first choice or toast of electoral contestations in Africa, in most or some African countries, still keeping, you know, that image of 19th, 20th century Africa?
Well, I think we have to look at what happened to Africa after the period of liberation or decolonization. We had the usurpation of representative power by many military institutions. I have always felt that it was an aberration, but it is an aberration that became widespread. And as a result, many of the so-called democratic politicians do not have a direct link to the founding fathers of their nation. The legacy that they're following is the legacy of power and privilege that they inherited from the military. As a result, even here in Nigeria, we've seen it as big and diverse socially as Nigeria is. We saw the importance of the military when it came to preparing us for representative democracy.
Yeah.
I won't say much about that because this is about Burundi. But in countries like Burundi, what happened is that those privileged professionals, military professionals, became the protectors of privilege. And that privilege is what power is about today in those countries.
All right, okay. You talked about representative democracy. Mark, some people, you know, observers and political scientists will feel that, yes, in Burundi, they have that representative democracy. When you look 30% for women who are contesting in the National Assembly, 30% position is reserved for them. And there is a kind of almost near 50-50 balance of power between the Hutus and the Tutsis, 60% for the Hutus and 40% for the Tutsi. How representational would you say this is? Mark?
That's a very good question, and it's tricky to answer because is it representative if the law forces people to be thus representative? It's tricky because, again, are the elections free and fair? So the woman who's there, she's female, but is she representing the people who really voted? And that's the real disenfranchisement and confusion that countries like Burundi bring, where they have this very nice constitution, very nice agreement even that was reached in the 2000s in Arusha. But the real application of it, when the president seems to be choosing who is an MP and who isn't, then you find that gender and tribe may be represented, but the people, their desires and hopes and dreams may not be represented at all. And this phenomenon is quite rife in Africa. In fact, in Southern Africa, there is the saying that perhaps it is time that Southern Africa was set free from its freedom fighters, because indeed the freedom fighter has become the new oppressor of the masses.
That seems to be the feelings amongst the people, not only in Southern Africa, but in East Africa, and probably some other parts of Africa. But this despondency of hopelessness and helplessness that pervades the entire Burundian landscape seems to even extend to those who've gone into exile. It's estimated about 500,000 of them from that video that we watched earlier. Mark?
Yes, the despondency is quite real, because you can imagine there are about 300,000 refugees from Burundi in Tanzania alone, and then remember, this is a country that to the south of it, you've got the Congo, which is equally a war-torn country. So the amount of hope that they have in changes in their country is very minimal. And this is driven by the fact that for a lot of African countries, and I'll give you an example of Zimbabwe, they got rid of Mugabe, but Mnangagwa does not seem to have done much better for them. So the despondency is not just in, and we used to believe that if a country can hold an election, then it's going to change. But it seems for a lot of African countries, the more they vote, the more things remain the same.
The same and change. Are we Africans, are vast to change? That's what probably I should be asking you. Then when you look at the Burundian elections in just 48 hours, the COVID-19 is gradually ravaging or spiking up in Africa. The government doesn't seem to care about the welfare and the health of its people. Is election more crucial now than tackling the COVID-19?
You see, you sometimes find yourself in a very tricky situation where maybe this election should have been postponed for government to face the social issue or social medical issue. But would that have been the right thing, given the fact that the government's legitimacy is actually questioned? Even the third term that he's serving was questioned and was actually rubbished by the 2018 referendum result. So one sees that the people are in a crisis, and what is likely to come from this election is more crisis.
More crisis, more crisis. Mark, the picture is not so good, too ominous, to swallow the Rwandan situation. Do you think that this election would be a break or one for the unity of Burundi? Is it going to, tear away all the agreements in 2000, the Arusha agreements and declaration? Do you foresee a situation like that?
I wish I could tell the people watching that indeed Burundi is looking into a bright new future. But the omens, as they say, do not look good for the people of Burundi. Number one, we can clearly see that without external observers, then the opposition is looking at an election that is probably going to be rigged. But also at the same time, we know the opposition is not going to sit back and allow the election to be rigged without them saying anything about it. And let's also remember that the opposition is made up of former generals and former politicians who have experienced violence before. So this is not time for them to say that it is freedom. Indeed, it is time where the African Union, which seems to be a toothless dog in this particular situation, the East African community, whose observers were kicked out, but all of them need to prepare for a potential crisis in Burundi. That is what the omen portend for this country, unfortunately.
Well, Lindsay, very quickly before we go on another break, if you look at Burundi, its economy is in tatters, it's under heavy sanctions, and with this election, being put in the clouds and doubtful, it looks as if there will be more sanctions against the Burundian government.
The problem is, who do the sanctions hurt most? Is it the people or the leadership? And the crisis that we are facing in Burundi is that of the people's will. Even if the people would like to remove its present leadership, they may not have the wherewithal to do so. And as a result, because people like outside other Africans and the AU and the UN may want to see change, but it might just have to accommodate some tolerance.
All right, we'll be back, Lindsay. A good point to stop you. You're still watching the Arise interview. We'll still got more to come from our correspondent in Nairobi, the Kenyan capital, and here in Abuja in the studios. Stay with us. You're welcome back to the Arise interview with me, Christian Ogodo. We're live in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Thanks for staying with us. Okay, let's cross back again to Nairobi via WebEx, where Arise news correspondent in East Africa, Mark Bichachi, is still with us. Mark, earlier, Lindsay was talking about the people's will, in fact, including you, most likely to be subverted. And my question is, if that happens, how will the people react to this?
Unfortunately, the people of Burundi are people who are used to fighting for their rights. They're used to going out there and demanding their rights. If the elections of 2015 are anything to go by, then we are most likely going to see a repeat of the same. And if that happens, then you can only imagine with the powers that Nkurunziza currently has, because remember, he is still president until August, and he's been given power to declare a state of emergency. So there will be a reaction of the people. They will go onto the streets, and Nkurunziza will respond with his usual force and police discipline.
And police discipline. And, well, the opposition had complained about the campaigns, how they were mad with violence, restrictions, and the rest. How would you really, before the campaigns closed last Saturday, how would you describe those campaigns? So the message is really being taken to the people to, get them back on short-footed economic life again?
Well, the message has been about turning around the economy of Burundi. The message has been around getting a leader who can remove the sanctions, allow for business to continue, and get jobs for the many Burundians who are living in poverty. That message given by the opposition has, of course, resonated. And Lindsay had said that that is probably the biggest desire of the people if the election, the referendum of 2018 is anything to go by. But that said, let us remember that the opposition has 7 different candidates as well. So will that eat into Rwasa's possibility of winning? Maybe. But the key question and the key thing to realize is a majority of Burundians, from what I have observed, are keen to change power from the ruling party that has been there. Will they be allowed to do so? Doubtful.
A question, key question and issue that political analysts and the public would be asking again is, does the opposition have the capacity to regenerate and rejuvenate the Burundian nation that is so, deep or steeped in sanctions, with a very, very depressed economy capital income is almost less than $1. Does Rwasa, does he have the capacity to reignite the Burundian economy?
I think whether he has the capacity or not is a question of whether he can forge alliances or not. This is what I mean. He definitely has the political acumen and the goodwill of the people. Secondly, the world economics are simple enough. What do I mean? If he's able to bring back the rights of the people and give the people free rein, the sanctions will be lifted. And if sanctions are lifted, then all he needs to do is become a trading post between Congo and Rwanda and Tanzania. And it is possible to begin to build in Burundi what Paul Kagame has successfully built in Rwanda. And it doesn't take much time to turn around the country. The big question is not even whether Rwasa will have big ideas, but whether he will be the reformer that he's already saying that he is.
Thanks very much there for the great submission. But let me turn to Lindsay. Lindsay, Burundi is in, the precipice of not disintegration, but economically, there's nothing so much to write home about. The sanctions are heavy. Most likely, if the elections don't go well, as observers fear, may not go well, there will be more sanctions. Can Burundi survive these? And what's the fate of the people?
Well, it has to survive. All African nations must survive somehow. And that was the point I was making earlier, is that when crises like these arise in some African countries, you look to the doctrine of tolerance. What is existing, you have to accept it. So I believe the AU will be tasked with the very difficult task after the elections of managing whatever situation is there. We must hope that the opposition will not provoke serious conflict. They may be right in raising protests and trying to bring to light the truth of what the situation is. But one hopes it will not lead to a descent into chaos, as we have seen in that part of the world before, in both Burundi and its neighboring twin nation. But what will come out of this is that if the present president accepts some form of change from himself to his chosen, his chosen candidate, there may be a basis on which the AU can engage in talks and propose changes in conduct of the country's affairs. As for the economic situation, you have raised a very important point. The huge refugee population, the huge exile population. One is looking forward to a day when Burundians can return to Burundi to help remake the nation. That is one of the biggest problems that the country will face after the elections.
Absolutely. Let's go back to Nairobi. Mark, let's look at the candidates, the ruling party's candidates, who, like we know, is an army general, Evariste Ndayishimiye. You want to tell us some of his unique selling points? I mean, not just because He's running under the platform of the ruling party. He's the anointed man of President Nkurunziza and the rest. Are there, certain values that you think it can bring to help the Burundian society?
One of his claims to fame, which I find quite intriguing, is he was among the first military personnel after the bloody war of Burundi who was brought into the capital to try and first put as a forward party to get the country into order. But secondly, he was in charge of consolidating and putting together the police force post the peace treaty, and he did so, and it's considered a thing of courage. But let's also remember that also means that he is deeply a man who has been by the side of Nkurunziza, which again is interesting because Rwasa equally fought side by side with Nkurunziza in the war, and therefore his claim to fame is being a very effective military leader, a very effective he carried out his commands very well. He's also had a very good career in the limelight. He's liked within the ranks of the political party he belongs to. But the question that I have not been able to see in my research of him is whether he is willing to be a reformer. Leading, he can lead, but where will he lead the people? Will he follow the footsteps of Nkurunziza, as he has said he will? Because the other thing that he said is he will follow Nkurunziza's footsteps to the latter. Therefore, will he be able to divert, as the current Angolan president did and turned against the Dos Santos family? That remains to be seen. But from what I have observed, there is no hint of change that is coming with Evaristo.
Let me ask Lindsay here. If the contestation, particularly of the presidency, can be described here as a spoil, of war, or as he said in other African countries, a share of the national cake. Because
our brother in Nairobi has hit the nail on the head.
Absolutely.
That what we are seeing, even this election, is a response to the aftermath of conflict.
Yeah.
And that's the major thing. I don't really know enough about the personalities involved to know their individual habits, but clearly the general process, even the opposition leader was a rebel leader, was a military leader. Everybody has come into the politics as a result of the outcome of conflict. And what they should be doing, we should hope, is finding a way to avoid further conflict. But as I said, members of the military profession protect privilege, and that is what we see happening in Burundi today. We are watching a race for a privileged position, and the people have made it clear that they are doubtful of the values and quality of their leadership. I always go back to the incredible result of the 2018 referendum,
yeah,
which made it plain that the ruling party was unpopular. And yet that ruling party is today planning to
hold on to power. That was why I asked the question, spoil of war or just sharing the national cake? Okay, we want to go on another short break, and you're still watching the Arise interview. We have more to interrogate about the Burundi presidential and general elections. When we return, stay with us. You're welcome back to the Arise interview with me, Christian Ogodo. We're live in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. And here in Abuja, I have the well-traveled African journalist, author, and writer, Lindsay Barrett. And in far away Nairobi, in Kenya, we have a Rise News East Africa correspondent, Mark Bichachi. Mark Bichachi, the question one would be asking at this time is, with all this impending or confabulations, the election to hold in the midst of COVID-19, the opposition, saying, hey, no, this election shouldn't, it's already rigged because there are no observers, it's not going to be fair, they've contested the issue of the voters register. What would then be the way forward? What would you be suggesting that the African Union, for example, the East African Union, probably the United Nations, be doing?
Well, the answer lies in what Bill Clinton said as regards the Rwandan genocide. They should not wait until it is too late for them to actually take action concerning this particular issue. I think they should prepare for the worst. I think they should prepare to have dialogue with the opposition leaders, with the candidates that are running. And they should also prepare to weigh heavily on Nkurunziza for him not to act too boisterously during this period. I think that's what they need to do, and they need to do it urgently.
Doing it urgently will need the intelligentsia community in Burundi, but they seem to be absent. I mean, loads of them are already in exile. So who will the international community be really speaking to?
To be honest with you, and I laugh a bit about your question, because today as we speak, a lot of my sources in Burundi had already taken off the country. Information is scarce, but the one thing that remains open is Burundi does need its neighbors. It needs Congo, it needs Rwanda, it needs Tanzania, it needs Kenya, and it needs Uganda. It is time for the East African community to begin to actually talk to Nkurunziza and prepare for the post-election ramifications. Without that, then what will happen is we will see two things ravage Burundi: COVID-19 and the people of Burundi being brutalized by their police once again.
Okay, well, thanks so very much, Mark Bichachi. With you in Nairobi, Kenya, we'll draw the curtains there, and thanks so much for being part of the Arise interview. That's Arise News East Africa correspondent Mark Bichachi there, giving us some great perspective to the upcoming Burundi elections due in just 48 hours. That's 20th of May. Let's turn to you, Lindsay. He landed, by saying, look, the country needs all its neighbor in East Africa. There is no what you want to call the intelligentsia that I mean are the professionals, those who can drive the economy, whether politically, economically, and socially, and the rest. That's a big minus for such a country.
Yes, it is. It is. And Burundi has been affected a lot, not only by internal crisis, but by crisis around. The Rwandan,
the Great Lake region and the rest.
And everything in the Horn and so on. Burundi has had the impact of instability in the region. And for them to stand up after such an election, they need support from outsiders, from the AU. As you mentioned, the AU, the UN, they will need. But who will the AU speak to? Is it those who perpetrate the usurpation of the will of the people? Or is it those who are in opposition but not in power? It's very interesting to see what is going to happen. But Burundi is going to need a lot of tolerance. We may have to accept whatever result they bring.
Just for the country to move on.
Just for the country to
for the sake of peace. Not for the sake of the people's own sustainability, their own livelihood.
Because the hope in African politics, I have always said, is that no matter how bad things are, they will get better. So you tolerate a lot of mishaps in the hope that you get to something better.
I like the words that you use there, mishaps, you know. So when they occur, what comes to mind first is the women and the children,
yes,
who are usually the victims of any conflagration, you know, anywhere in the world. But shouldn't the UN and AU forces that were stationed there before, you know, the very violent and oppressive 2015 elections be returning to that place because of the fragile peace that is there? Because if that fragility is broken further, like you said, it's easy to envelope the whole of, you know, the Great Lake region and others.
Yes, well, we would suggest that if there is an appearance of a breakdown of post-election law and order, maybe the AU would have an opportunity to put back a peacekeeping force. But I don't think that that situation has yet arisen. You know, the AU did have a peacekeeping force in, and interestingly, when the peacekeeping force decided to withdraw, it was President Nkurunziza,
yeah,
who protested most loudly. He didn't want them to leave.
Okay. Despite the protestation, they left. But let's look at another diplomatic angle, you know, to douse tension and the rest. Should a special rapporteur be appointed, you know, to oversee things, you know, as a middle block to any unforeseen?
Well, I believe the AU must continue to engage, even though there is right now there is almost a total disconnect between the ruling government and the AU. But I think the AU, that is the purpose of the AU, to continue to engage diplomatically with any country, regardless of what the crisis is.
And what's your message for the opposition? Because
the opposition, keep to your ideals as they have done, but realize reality is the name of the game in Africa. And if there is a result that you feel unable to sanction, at least keep your protests at the level of
tolerance that will not
and
engulf the nation.
Just remember, don't engulf the nation in the kind of violence that can come.
In most African democracies or elections and the rest, there doesn't seem to be power sharing in 30 seconds. Would you advocate that for Burundi,
well,
whatever the outcome?
I can't. I'm not a Burundian. I haven't been there, and I don't know what the modalities would be. But yes, that is what we need in Africa, power sharing rather than power grabbing.
Indeed, power sharing rather than power grabbing is what we need to continue to unify the entire fabrics of the African continent. Lindsay Barrett, well-traveled, versatile writer, journalist, thanks so very much for coming on the Arise interview.
Thank you,
to my colleague in Nairobi, Mark Bichachi, the East African correspondent of Arise News. Well, that's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Do join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Goodbye and thanks for watching.